Welcome back to Movies Explained, where we break down all of your favorite movies. You might be left wondering what envy can do to a person as we delve into the recap of psychological thriller movie called American Psycho today. Patrick Bateman, a young, handsome, and successful investment banker in New York City, spends the majority of his time dining at well-known restaurants in 1987. This is exactly how the movie starts, having casual discussions with his partners at a restaurant where squid ravioli and onion marmalades are served. Sounds fancier than the Queen's name. He then moves to a bar where the female bartender refuses to use cards and demands cash instead. Patrick deals with her politely, with a big smile on his face, but as soon as she gets a little distant from the counter, he says that she is a fucking bitch and he wants to stab her to death and play with her blood. Patrick Bateman is someone who believes in taking care and prioritizing himself by keeping his nutrition in check and making sure that he is physically active every morning. He is also big on using fancy scrubs, exfoliators, cleansers, and even aftershave balms on his face and body. By these standards, I definitely have no love for myself and my body at all. Later we get to know that Patrick is not very fond of his fiancée. When Evelyn suggests that they should get married, Patrick refuses by saying that he cannot take time off work. Even though he hates his job, he continues to work because he wants to fit in. At a dinner, Patrick suspects that Evelyn has an affair with one of their friends, Timothy, since according to him he is the only interesting person he knows. On the other hand, Patrick is having an affair with Evelyn's closest friend, Courtney, but she is engaged to Louise, who is one of his co-workers. Patrick tries to convince her to come to dinner with him the next day, saying that she is dating an asshole. She gives in and comes to dinner with him, but she is unconscious the whole time since she is apparently operating on psychiatric drugs. At a business meeting, Bateman and his colleagues show off their business cards, highlighting their style and where they had them printed. The cards of one of their co-workers, Paul Allen, are preferred by his other co-workers over his cards. Patrick is furious and refuses to recognize his lack of ability in this situation. This shows that Patrick is an envious and highly competitive person. On his way back, Patrick comes across a homeless man in an alley, and after shouting at him about him being a loser and cursing him, Bateman takes out his frustration on him and kills him and his dog and leaves the scene. The next morning, he is casually seen getting a massage. He acknowledges that even though he might have flesh and blood, he does not possess any human emotions except greed and disgust. He also makes it clear to the audience about having bloodlust and that his mask of sanity might just be about to fall off. Following Evelyn's Christmas party, Patrick and Paul, who misidentifies Bateman as a different co-worker, make dinner reservations. Alan's ability to get appointments at Dorsha, an upscale restaurant where getting in is a major thing, and his rich lifestyle makes Patrick angry. Since Paul did not know that he was actually with Patrick, he says stuff to him about Patrick being a dork and wondering how he ended up with a woman like Evelyn. Patrick gets Paul intoxicated and brings him to his flat, where he uses an axe to murder him while playing music and the news. While he is transferring the dead body, he is stopped by Louise on his way to Paul's flat, but he does not seem to suspect anything. Patrick deals with him and he leaves. He disposes of the body and enters Alan's apartment to tell his answering machine that Alan has left for London. He also packs his suitcase to make the story more believable and also experiences a moment of sheer panic while doing so. Fast forward to a few days, Paul's relatives employ Donald Kimball, a private detective who questions Patrick about Alan's disappearance in his office. Patrick's anxiety is palpable throughout the entire meeting. Additionally, the detective suggests that Alan might have been spotted in London. Patrick tells Donald that Paul might be a homosexual who does a lot of cocaine. He is also asked a few other questions about Paul. That night on his way back, Patrick brings home a prostitute and tells her that his name is Paul Allen. He also asks her to respond only when she is called Christy. Patrick then has another prostitute invited over and introduces himself to her exactly how he had just done with Christy, and asks her to respond to Sabrina. The sexual interaction they have is captured on video. Then, using scissors and other tiny sharp objects, he physically torments them, leaving their faces and backs marked by him. In the morning, he pays them and tells them to leave. While dining at a fancy restaurant with his co-workers, Patrick is having a discussion about how women who are even a little intelligent are those who are not pretty, and they try to increase their smartness in order to compensate for their ugliness. He then goes on making a joke about women and a serial killer, and his colleagues are left speechless. Soon, when Patrick's co-worker Louise hands him a new business card, he looks evidently disturbed by it. He gets up and leaves the hall and tries to strangle Louise in the posh restaurant's bathroom. Louise misinterprets the attempt as a sexual overture and expresses his passion for him. Louise tells him that he has been waiting for this for so long and that he really finds him hot. Patrick is disgusted by his behavior and decides to just leave the washroom. Later, Patrick comes to his office with Donald waiting for him in order to conduct a second interview about Paul's disappearance. He asks Patrick his whereabouts on the night of Paul's disappearance, to which he says he was on a date with a girl named Veronica. Donald tells him that this is not the information he had received, and the confused look on Patrick's face is evident. Donald leaves after requesting Patrick to try to remember the night Paul went missing. He also schedules a lunch with him in the next week. Patrick then meets up with Courtney, who tells him to have a nice Easter even if she does not see him before it. During the night, he visits a bar where he consumes drugs. On his way back, he is stopped by a model and takes her to his home. The model is subsequently killed, and the severed head is placed in his freezer. He then invites his assistant Jean to supper the following day, and suggests they meet for drinks at his flat at 7 p.m. after he pretends to have an appointment at Dorsia. When the plan is carried out, she ends herself at Patrick's residence. When Patrick asks Jean about her future intentions, she starts talking to him, and while she is busy expressing herself, Bateman has a nail gun poised at the back of her head and is about to kill her when he gets a message from Evelyn on his answering machine and gets disturbed by it. Donald invites Patrick to join him for lunch as planned and inquires about any fresh insights into the day Paul vanished. When Donald reveals that Patrick was with Paul and a few co-workers that night, Patrick's panic is visible in his actions. Patrick's alibi is confirmed when Donald says that a co-worker of his claims to have eaten dinner with him the night of Alan's disappearance. Patrick tremblingly grins in response to Donald's remark that it is simply unimaginable for one of Alan's pals to murder him without any motive. He drops by Christie's house to invite her to accompany him on his way back, but she declines, stating that she had to go see a doctor as a result of the previous incident and even thought of getting a lawyer. Patrick reassures her that this time it will be very different from last time. She reluctantly consents after Patrick writes her a check. Patrick brings her to Alan's place, where after giving his friend Elizabeth some drugs, he has sex with both Christie and her. Christie flees after hearing painful screams coming from under the bed sheets as Patrick kills Elizabeth during a sexual session. As she runs and looks for a way out, she comes upon multiple female bodies. As she runs down a stairwell, a bloody nude Bateman pursues her and attacks her with a running chainsaw. He throws the chainsaw at her just while she is crossing the stairs, and Christie collapses after getting hit by the chainsaw. The following day, Patrick calls off his engagement to Evelyn. He tells her that they have never really connected and that she isn't all that important to him. Evelyn makes a scene in response, but he still departs. On his way out of the hotel, Patrick notices a cat while he uses an ATM. His intrusive thoughts starts taking over him, and he gets ready to shoot the cat because the ATM says, "Feed me a stray cat." Instead, he shoots a lady who confronts him. Following that, there is a police chase, but Patrick kills some policemen by shooting one of the officers and blowing up a patrol car. Bateman then murders a security guard and a janitor before running inside his office to hide. He notices a helicopter flying above his room and becomes alarmed and terrified. He frantically contacts Harold Carnes, his attorney, and leaves a confession on his answering machine, confessing to killing 20 to 40 individuals, of which 5 to 10 must have been homeless people, as well as a few young females inside his flat. Additionally, he recounts murdering an ex-girlfriend of his in the past and ultimately Paul Allen, whose body is dissolving in a bathtub with an axe. He also admitted to videotaping them and eating a few of the victims' brains. All throughout the phone call, Patrick was sobbing. Patrick gets ready the next morning and goes to clean Alan's apartment, but he discovers that it is empty and for sale. Before requesting that he leave and not return, a real estate agent cryptically informs him that the flat does not belong to Paul. Patrick phones Jean in a fit of frenzy and informs her that he won't be able to make it to the office today. She is asked to call off all of his appointments for the day. Jean, in the meantime, is stunned and in amazement when she discovers intricate, violent drawings of murder and mutilation in Bateman's work notebook. Patrick makes an effort to compose himself before heading to lunch with his co-workers. Harold is there too, and Patrick goes up to him and mentions the phone message. Patrick is mistaken for another guy by Harold, who dismisses the confession as a joke. Harold responds that Patrick's allegations are untrue because he recently had dinner with Paul in London, and that his attempts to identify himself and confess the killings are absurd. Patrick then attempts to clarify who he is, at which Harold excuses himself and Patrick is left speechless and in absolute disbelief. When a befuddled Patrick gets back to his buddies, they talk about dinner plans and debate whether CNN News anchor Ronald Reagan is a nice elderly man as he appears to be, or is he a concealed psychopath because he looks so cool about things on the news. Uncertain of whether his misdeeds were real or made up, Patrick comes to the conclusion that he will never face the punishment he wants. He claims in his narration that he suffers continuously, that he desires his suffering on others, and that he does not hope for a better world for other people. He wants no one to be able to escape the suffering, and that his confession is meaningless because there is no catharsis and the suffering persists. He still doesn't know who he really is. The movie meets its climax here. We would now really love to share our thoughts about the movie with you. Bret Easton Ellis' novel was adapted into the film American Psycho, which generally misses some of the book's sharper satire and critical themes in favor of dark comedy and horrifying horror. Both consciously and unconsciously, it may be more blatantly humorous now than it was 20 years ago. Consider the famed business card scene. It's amazing how similar all of the characters are to one another. They all have slick back hair, buy their suits from the same store, which Bateman emphasizes in his monologue, and when they start comparing business cards, you start noting that they all have the same job description as well. Vice President of Acquisitions and Mergers. Font color and texture are the only things they need to define themselves. They are strong guys who have been reduced to their purest insecurities. When you see American Psycho 23 years after it was released, you understand how ridiculous the public's fixation with Patrick Bateman is. He is definitely not an alpha male. He is a traditionalist and insecure, and his violent urges are simply the most extreme expressions of his sense of inadequacy. He may seem a Sigma lone wolf person for the fact that he makes a lot of money performing a tedious task that he unquestionably loathes. His extreme sexual violence, which he exhibits towards sex workers like every other serial killer, or his apartment agonizing loneliness. Bret Easton Ellis' satire became more obvious after 23 years, if anything. We believe Patrick Bateman's reputation is more significant and well-known than his role. The swaggering, self-assured businessmen are prepared to clap and kill anyone that stands in their way. But it's not quite the same. The perpetual sadness that results from abiding by the rules drives Bateman crazy, since all he wants is to be fulfilled by the world around him. He doesn't have a deranged master plan to obliterate society or anything like that. He's basically a better-looking version of incels and weirdos, which is why he appeals to them. Thanks for watching. Let us know in the comments what you thought of this movie and which movie you'd like to see recapped next, and we'll see you in the next one.